When a broke mechanic stepped into a factory to fix an impossible engine, no one expected him to succeed. But what he uncovered inside the machine didn't just save the factory. It exposed secrets powerful enough to destroy a billionaire CEO. Stay with us, because this story takes a turn you will never see coming. In the gray industrial town of Millhaven, life revolved around the giant steel factory that stood at its center. The factory wasn't just a workplace. It was the heart of the town. Generations of families depended on its wages to pay rent, buy food, and keep the lights on. But one winter morning, disaster struck. The factory's massive production engine, an enormous machine that powered the entire assembly line, suddenly stopped. At first, workers thought it was a temporary breakdown. Machines failed all the time, and repairs usually took only a few hours. But this was different. The engine didn't just stop, it groaned, hissed, and let out a final screech before shutting down completely. Sparks flew, metal clanged, and the entire plant fell into silence. Panic spread. Without this engine, the factory could not run. Without the factory, hundreds of families would have no paychecks. Rumors of layoffs raced through the workers' cafeteria. Some whispered that the company was already in debt, and this shutdown would be the final nail in the coffin. Richard Alden, the factory CEO, wasted no time. He called in the best engineers from across the state. Highly paid specialists in crisp suits walked the factory floor, carrying sleek laptops and expensive tools. For 3 days they examined the machine, running diagnostics, tightening bolts, and scanning every part of the system. But one by one, their faces fell. Their conclusions were the same. The machine was beyond repair. Its design was too old, its systems too complex. It's impossible, one engineer finally declared, shutting his laptop with frustration. The workers watched in fear. If they can't fix it, one man muttered, no one can. Mothers worried about feeding their children. Fathers worried about paying mortgages. The town was collapsing with the silence of that broken engine. Then, almost like an afterthought, someone mentioned the name of a local man, Daniel Cross. He wasn't a licensed engineer, just a struggling mechanic who fixed old trucks and motorcycles in a greasy garage on the edge of town. He had no degree, no fame, no powerful connections. Most people laughed at the idea of calling him a backyard mechanic against this machine. But when desperation grew, the factory manager made the call. With nothing left to lose, Daniel Cross was invited to face the impossible. And so, the fate of Millhaven's largest factory, and perhaps much more, was placed in the hands of a man with little more than a toolbox, calloused hands, and a stubborn belief that nothing was truly unfixable. Daniel Cross arrived at the factory gates early in the morning, his old pickup rattling louder than it should. The guard at the gate barely glanced at him, shaking his head as if the man didn't belong in a place this important. Daniel climbed out, carrying nothing but his battered red toolbox, scratched, dented, and older than him. It was all he owned that still worked reliably. When he entered the factory floor, dozens of eyes followed him. Workers leaned against railings, whispering to each other. Some were curious, others openly skeptical. To them, Daniel was just that garage guy, the man who fixed tractors and motorcycles for cheap. They couldn't imagine him taming the beast of a machine that towered before him. The engine was a monster, 10 times the size of a car, with pipes snaking across the ceiling and gears as wide as doors. It had been built decades earlier, before most of the workers were even born. Rust ate at its sides, and oil dripped onto the concrete floor in dark puddles. Its silence was almost eerie, the kind of silence that meant the entire factory was bleeding money every second it stayed that way. Daniel set his toolbox down, opened it slowly, and began studying the machine. He didn't rush, didn't panic. Instead, he placed his hand on the cold metal, listening, as though the engine might speak to him if he paid close enough attention. Workers exchanged doubtful glances. Hours passed. He traced wiring, tapped on panels, and scribbled notes into a grease-stained notebook. Then he noticed something odd. Along the side of a hidden panel, scratched faintly into the steel, were markings. Not numbers. Not English. Symbols. He brushed away layers of grime to reveal more, small sequences etched into several parts of the engine. He frowned. They weren't random. They meant something. Strange, he muttered under his breath. By evening, when the factory lights dimmed, Most of the workers had left. The engineers had given up long ago. But Daniel remained. He worked by the dim glow of a lantern he brought with him, sweat dripping from his brow, the smell of oil and rust filling his lungs. And as he leaned closer to the markings, memories stirred, his late mother's voice, teaching him unfamiliar words when he was a boy. Words that weren't English at all. That night, Daniel realized something that chilled him to the bone. This engine wasn't built for Millhaven. It wasn't even American. The following evening, Daniel returned to the factory, carrying his notebook and lantern like a soldier heading to war. The factory floor was eerily empty. Most workers had gone home, convinced the battle was already lost. Only the hum of backup generators filled the vast steel chamber. The massive engine loomed in front of him, silent and stubborn, like a sleeping giant that refused to wake. Daniel climbed onto the machine, greasy hands exploring bolts and valves no engineer had dared touch. His heart pounded as he traced the strange markings again. They weren't random scratches. They were instructions, laid out in a sequence. The problem was, they weren't written in English. He flipped open his notebook and carefully copied the symbols. The more he studied them, the clearer they became. It hit him like lightning. These weren't just symbols. They were French. Memories of his mother returned, her gentle voice teaching him phrases when he was a boy, words he never thought he'd use. She had been a teacher before she passed away, and French was her favorite language. Daniel had always dismissed the lessons as pointless. But now, inside this dark factory, those fragments of childhood knowledge became a lifeline. He whispered the translations as he worked. Ouvrir, tourner, pression. Open, turn, pressure. The words matched the parts of the engine. Each marking was a hidden instruction, telling him how to realign the system. Piece by piece, Daniel followed the code. He adjusted valves, rewired circuits, and replaced worn gears. Every turn of his wrench echoed in the hollow factory. Every spark from his torch seemed louder than thunder. His hands trembled, not from fear of failure, but from the realization that this machine wasn't just broken. It had been deliberately designed to be understood only by someone who could read those markings. Finally, after hours of silent labor, Daniel wiped sweat from his face and took a step back. He pressed the ignition switch. At first, nothing. Then, with a deafening roar, the machine came alive. Gears spun, pipes hissed, and the floor vibrated under his boots. Sparks lit the ceiling. The impossible engine was running, stronger, faster, and smoother than ever. Workers poured back into the room, their eyes wide in disbelief. Cheers erupted. Some clapped him on the back, others simply stared. Daniel Cross, the broke mechanic from a forgotten garage, had done what the experts could not. But in that moment of victory, he also realized something terrifying. This engine had secrets, and he had just uncovered them. The next morning, the factory buzzed with energy. The production line was alive again, workers smiling for the first time in weeks. Trucks rolled out of the loading docks, carrying shipments that meant paychecks would continue. Daniel Cross walked through the plant like an unexpected hero. Men slapped him on the back, women thanked him, and even the factory manager shook his hand with relief. But when CEO Richard Alden arrived, the celebration dimmed. Tall, broad-shouldered, with cold eyes that never revealed much, Alden walked straight past the cheering workers and stopped in front of Daniel. "You fixed it," he said flatly. His tone wasn't grateful. It was suspicious. Daniel hesitated before nodding. "Yes, sir. The engine wasn't broken beyond repair. It just needed understanding." Alden narrowed his gaze. "And how exactly did you understand it when no licensed engineer could?" The question cut through the air. Workers fell silent, waiting for Daniel's reply. He shifted uneasily, wiping grease from his hands onto his rag. He could have lied. He could have said instinct, luck, or experience. But instead, he told the truth. The markings on the machine, they weren't in English. They were in French. The factory floor froze. For a few seconds, the only sound was the steady hum of the engine he had revived. Alden's jaw tightened, his expression unreadable. Then, with a forced smile, he clapped Daniel on the shoulder. Impressive, very impressive, but his grip lingered longer than it should have, and his eyes held something colder than admiration. That evening, Daniel returned to his small garage, exhausted but proud. He imagined his life turning around. More jobs, more respect, maybe even a steady contract with the factory. But when he unlocked the door, his stomach dropped. His workbench had been ransacked. Tools were scattered across the floor, drawers left open. But nothing valuable was stolen. Instead, something had been added. On the middle of his bench lay a single folded note. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, written in neat, blocky letters, were 5 chilling words: "Stay quiet, or you'll regret it." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The machine he had saved wasn't just a machine. It was hiding a past that someone was willing to protect, at any cost. And now, he was tangled in it. A few days later, Daniel was summoned back to the factory. At first, he thought it was about payment for his work, maybe even a contract to stay on as chief mechanic. His spirits lifted as he drove his rusty pickup toward the factory gates. After all, hadn't he saved the company? Didn't he deserve at least a little recognition? But as soon as he entered the building, the atmosphere felt different. Workers avoided his gaze. The factory floor was strangely quiet, the usual clanging of metal and chatter gone. Instead of being led to the engine room, Daniel was directed to a private boardroom upstairs. Inside, CEO Richard Alden was waiting, but he wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits sat at the table. They weren't factory men. Their posture was too rigid, their faces too blank. "Government. Mr. Cross," one of them said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "We need to talk about what you discovered." Daniel opened the folder. Inside were grainy photographs, black and white images of the same engine, but not in Millhaven. These photos showed the machine being loaded onto a ship, guarded by men in French military uniforms. The captions, typed neatly in French, described it as a prototype moteur militaire, a military prototype. Daniel's stomach dropped. "You mean, this engine was stolen?" The agent nodded. "Smuggled out decades ago. And Alden here has been hiding it all this time." Alden's face darkened, but he said nothing. His silence was confirmation enough. Daniel's pulse quickened. He had stumbled into something much larger than a simple repair job. By reading those French codes, he hadn't just fixed a machine, he had unlocked evidence of an international crime. The second agent leaned forward, his voice calm but chilling. "You have 2 choices, Mr. Cross. Work with us. Use your knowledge to help decode what this engine really is, or disappear quietly." Daniel stared at them. His calloused hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision. He had started this as a broke mechanic, desperate for work. Now he was being pulled into a world of espionage, smuggling, and government secrets. What happened next remains a mystery. Some say Daniel agreed and vanished into government service, decoding machines that no one else could. Others whisper he fled the country, living under a new name. But one thing is certain. Daniel Cross, the man who fixed the impossible engine, uncovered a secret powerful enough to ruin a CEO and change his life forever.